You're not perfect.
The tree has friendly growths, yet you do not. You are terribly sad. You'd have a true friend if you had your own tumour. You may not live much longer. However, I am willing to offer you my body.
Please help us. An unsightly beast. A great terror looms.
fantastic. Hey, hey, hey. Run. Please, me. Please, me. Please, me. Please, me. Please, me. Please, me. You are fantastic. Run. I feel fantastic. Hey, hey, hey. You feel fantastic. Hey, hey, hey. You are fantastic. Hey, hey, hey. I feel fantastic. Hey, hey, hey.
Shaye? Are you still doing that hand thing? I heard you're doing the hand thing today. God, what is that? Shaye, what is it?
Hood.
You've been doing this for 24/7. Shaye, you've been doing the hand thing all day? I heard you were. Jordan told me you had been doing it on a sleeping bag earlier.
Hood.
God! Shaye, I can't stop doing the thing. What is it? God, I heard you're doing the hand thing. Shaye. My hands are hurting, Shaye. What is that? God, what is it? God, Shaye, have you been doing this for 24 hours in a row? Shaye, I can't stop doing the thing. What is it? Shaye? Are you still doing that hand thing?
La pequeña araña en un tubo se subió.
Item SCP-087. Object Class Euclid. SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase. Stairs descend in a 38-degree angle for 13 steps before reaching a semicircular platform of approximately 3 meters in diameter. Descent direction rotates 180 degrees at each platform. The design of SCP-087 limits subjects to a visual range of approximately 1.5 flights. A light source is required for any subjects exploring SCP-087, as there are no lighting fixtures or windows present. Lighting sources brighter than 75 watts have shown to be ineffective, as SCP-087 seems to absorb excess light. Subject reports and audio recordings confirm the sound of a crying, pleading child, estimated to be located approximately 200 meters below the initial platform. However, any attempts to descend the staircase have failed to bring subjects closer to the source. The depth of descent calculated from Exploration 4, the longest exploration, is shown to be far beyond both the possible structure of both the building and geological surroundings. At this time, it is unknown if SCP-087 has an endpoint. D8432 is a 43-year-old Caucasian male of average build and appearance and unremarkable psychological background. Class D designation as a result of demotion due to mishandling SCP. D8432 is equipped with a 75-watt flood lamp with battery power capable of lasting 24 hours, a handheld camcorder fitted with a transmission stream, and an audio headset for communication with Dr. at control. D8432 steps through doorway onto initial platform. Despite the wattage, the flood lamp only illuminates the first 9 steps. The second platform is not visible.
It's fucking dark.
Is your flood lamp functioning properly?
Yeah, it's working. It just won't light these stairs all the way down.
Thank you. Please continue. Reason for stopping?
You heard that? There's a fucking kid down here. Sounds like one.
Could you please describe the sound?
It's young. Either female or a very young boy. It's crying and sobbing and saying, "Please, help, please." Yeah, it just keeps repeating that and crying.
Can you estimate its distance from your current location?
Oh, fuck, I don't know. Maybe 200 meters down?
Please continue down the next flight. The subject descends another 13 steps. As he reaches the landing, audio of the child, as described, is picked up. The child alternates between sobbing, wailing, and the words, "Please, help," and "down here." The level of audio is consistent with D8432's report of it being approximately 200 meters below. Can you still hear the crying?
Yeah.
We're picking it up as well. Please continue down. Stop if you notice any changes in the audio or environment. The subject descends another 3 flights of stairs before stopping.
Keep going?
Please. D8432 continues another 17 flights, total of 22 flights, before stopping. There are no visual changes in the environment, and each flight has been a consistent 13 steps.
I'm not getting any fucking closer to the kid.
Stereo audio confirms that the crying noise has not increased in volume and remains approximately 200 meters below the subject. Noted. Please continue. The subject continues another 28 flights before stopping. 50 flights total. D8432 is standing on the 51st landing, counting the initial ground level landing. D8432 is estimated to be 200 meters below the initial platform. 34 minutes have elapsed. The volume of crying has not increased.
I'm feeling a little uneasy.
You spent a long time in a dark, unknown stairwell. It's natural. Please continue. The subject hesitates before stepping down on the next stair. As the subject moves forward, the flood lamp illuminates a face located approximately at the bottom of the flight, SCP-087-1. It appears to be the same size and shape as a human head, except it is lacking a mouth, nostrils, and pupils. The face is completely motionless, but is making direct eye contact, indicating its awareness of D8432.
Fuck? What the fuck is that? Holy shit. What the fuck?
Can you please describe what you see?
It's some sort of fucking person face thing. It's fucking looking right at me. Fuck? It's fucking looking right at me.
Is it moving?
No. It's just staring at me. Fuck. It's fucking creepy.
Please approach and further illuminate the entity.
Fuck. Man, I don't want to fucking do shit.
D8432 enters a panic state and rapidly ascends SCP-087. D8432 reaches the ground floor in 18 minutes, at which time he collapses and passes out. There is no sign of SCP-087-1. Review of the footage indicates an equal number of flights and steps ascending as descending. Audio of the crying and pleading remains at the same volume until the last flight, at which point it ceases. Medical reports indicate collapse was a result of the rapid ascension of the stairs, causing fatigue.
Nie tam red. There is nothing.
Love and passion for similar things can be the ties that bind. But what happens when that similar thing is killing? Today we discuss the serial killing husband and wife Fred and Rose West. Let's open the serial killer file. Frederick Walter West was born in England on September 29, 1941. His parents were two farmers who may have worked hard to provide for their family, but weren't without their vices. Growing up, Fred was exposed to many sexual acts at a young age. Fred's father, Walter, was known to engage in incestuous relationships with Fred's sisters while teaching the children that it was acceptable to commit bestiality in the household. It was speculated that his own mother began sexually abusing Fred at the age of 12. As a child, Fred lacked interest in school and eventually at the age of 15 dropped out to become a farm laborer. It was not long after when Fred turned 17 that he was involved in a motorcycle accident that caused Fred to sustain a severe head injury which resulted in a coma. The amount of trauma left him with metal plates in his head. This was the beginning to his temperamental attitude. 2 years after his first accident, Fred was purposely pushed down a fire escape after attempting to sexually molest a 13-year-old. These instances of head trauma eventually resulted in Fred falling victim to epileptic seizures. With the worsening of his conditions, Fred's family allowed him to stay back in his hometown. It was here that he reunited with an ex-girlfriend named Catherine Rena Costello. Once reuniting with Catherine, Fred found out that Catherine was a prostitute who had become pregnant from one of her customers. Accepting Catherine's career and her pregnancy, Fred married Catherine just after 2 months and moved into Coatbridge, Scotland. During this time, Fred took up work as an ice cream truck driver. Catherine gave birth to her first daughter, Charmaine, shortly after their move to Scotland on February 22, 1963. It didn't take long before the marriage went sour, however. Fred would constantly demand sex from Catherine, resulting in the birth of their first child together, Anne-Marie. In 1964, Fred's life in Scotland came to an official end when he ran over and killed a 4-year-old boy with his ice cream truck. Fearing for his safety, Fred moved his family and their nanny, Isa McNeil, to Bishop's Cleeve, Gloucestershire. After moving in 1965, his marriage began to deplete. Catherine was in desperate need to escape Fred's sadistic sexual demands and fled to Scotland in 1966 without the children. She would occasionally return to visit the children every few months, but seemed to stop showing up after a few years. Despite the separation, Fred and Catherine's friend Anne McFall soon became infatuated with Fred and became pregnant with his child in 1967. Anne eventually went missing when she was 8 months pregnant. Fred never filed a missing persons report and continued on with his life. On November 28, 1968, Fred's life would change forever when he met a woman by the name of Rosemary Letts at her job in Gloucester. She was only 15 years old at the time, but that didn't stop Fred. The two eventually moved in together and in 1970 had their first child together, Heather. That same year, Fred was in prison for theft. It was at this time that there were many accusations of Rose murdering Fred's stepdaughter, Charmaine, after she too went missing. According to Anne-Marie, each of the siblings were subject to frequent beatings at the hands of Rose while Fred was serving his time. On January 29, 1972, Fred and Rose married in Gloucester and had their second child named May. Rose was naive when it came to pleasing Fred and eventually turned to prostitution after Fred proposed her to make some extra cash. Fred and Rose eventually had 7 additional children together. The family moved to 25 Cromwell Street, a place that would eventually become known as the House of Horrors. Rose continued prostituting herself and with Fred's approval would engage in having sex with her own father. During Rose's prostitution sessions, Fred would often hide in the adjoining room and watch through a hole in the wall. In October 1972, the Wests hired 17-year-old Catherine Roberts as the children's nanny. She rejected Fred and Rose's engagement into their sex circle and in turn was raped by both husband and wife. Not satisfied, Fred and Rose's sexual abuse escalated to their children. In 1973, the Wests trapped Fred's first daughter, Anne-Marie, in a cellar where he bound and raped her as Rose watched. In 1979, Anne-Marie became pregnant by her father, but terminated the pregnancy. Not being able to cope with the extensive abuse, Anne eventually left. Things didn't change though. The West took it up a notch and eventually began to sexually abuse their daughter Heather, who eventually disappeared. On August of 1992, police decided to investigate the West, leading to Fred being charged and Rose being an accomplice to the rapes. Rose was later charged with child cruelty, resulting in their final 2 children being sent to foster care for further evaluation by social workers. It was common to hear the West joke about keeping Heather buried under their patio. This eventually led to police filing a warrant on the property in 1994. Shortly after filing a warrant, police investigated the property and found a burial ground underneath Fred and Rose's garden, something they weren't at all expecting to actually find. 2 dismembered and decapitated female corpses were discovered. One was believed to be that of Heather West, according to police. After many hours of interrogation, Fred admitted to the murders. However, he insisted that Rose had absolutely no involvement in any of them. Fred had also admitted to burying 9 bodies under the cellar of the house and also confessed to the whereabouts of his former wife, Catherine, his previous lover, Anne McFall, and his stepdaughter, Charmaine. This resulted in Fred West being charged with 12 counts of murder. Fred was taken into custody in Winson Green Prison on December 13, 1994. While awaiting his trial on January 1, 1995, Fred hanged himself by knotting his bedsheets together in his cell. Rose West later admitted to her participation in the sexual assaults. With her violent and dishonest behavior, the jury found Rose West guilty on 10 counts of murder. Rose's sentence was extended to a life sentence without any possibility of parole after the speculation of there being far more than just 12 killings. The West's home at 25 Cromwell Street was eventually demolished in 1996 and is now just a pathway leading to the town center. And it leaves behind the dark remains of a past never to be forgotten.
Earth. You live here on this planet somewhere, and everything that you've ever known is located right here. But just how small exactly is Earth when compared to the scale of the entire universe? Let's start by zooming out to where we can see our nearest cosmic neighbor, the Moon. You may think that the Moon is very close to Earth since it dominates our night skies, but in reality the Moon isn't this close to our planet, it's actually about this far away. 384,400 kilometers away from you right now on average. You could fit 30 entire Earths in between this distance, and if you somehow were able to drive a car at a constant 100 kilometers per hour speed, it would take you about 160 days to drive the entire distance. Despite this incredible distance, however, 12 humans have actually set foot here, representing the furthest away that any individual human has ever been away from the Earth, and one of humanity's greatest achievements. This is what the Earth would look like from there if you were standing there with them, and if you wanted to communicate with somebody back at home, it would take a message about 2.5 seconds to travel between you and them, since that's how fast the speed of light can travel at. This is a photo that was taken on Mars, and that tiny dot that you see there is Earth as seen from the Martian surface. On average, Mars is an incredible 225 million kilometers away from Earth, but that distance can be as high as 401 million kilometers. That means that whenever humanity finally gets around to landing a human on the planet, that person will be 986 times further away from Earth than the astronauts who landed on the Moon were. In addition, the time delay for sending a message from Mars back to Earth isn't just 2.5 seconds, it's actually more like 20 minutes each direction, which would render instant communication in the event of an emergency impossible. When we zoom out even further away, we can find the Voyager 1 space probe, which is the furthest away man-made object from Earth. It is currently located 138 AUs from the Earth, AU meaning astronomical unit, which is the distance between the Earth and the Sun, which means that Voyager 1 is 138 times further away from us than the Sun is. At some point on its long voyage, Voyager 1 turned its camera around and took this photograph. It may not look like much at first, but in my opinion, this is the greatest single photograph ever taken in all of human history. This tiny, pale blue dot is Earth, and I don't think that anybody has ever said something as amazing about this as Carl Sagan when he said, "If you look at it, you see a dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever lived out their lives. The aggregate of all our joys and sufferings. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and every forager. Every hero and coward. Every creator and destroyer of civilizations. Every king and every peasant. Every young couple in love. Every hopeful child. Every mother and every father. Every inventor and explorer. Every teacher of morals. Every corrupt politician. Every superstar. Every supreme leader. Every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Voyager 1 is currently traveling at 17 kilometers every single second, but even at that speed, it won't break out of the reach of our solar system for another 30,000 years. Once we go beyond the solar system, we arrive in our interstellar neighborhood. Here we shift to the light year unit of measurement, which is the distance that light travels in a full Earth year, or about 9.461 trillion kilometers. The star Proxima Centauri here is the closest other star to us other than our Sun, but it's still 4.24 light years away from us. To put that into perspective, if it was heading in the right direction, it would still take Voyager 1 over 70,000 years to reach it. In other words, if you drove your car at 100 kilometers an hour like in our previous example to the moon, it would take over 6 times longer than the entire age of the universe is just to finally get there, and it wouldn't even exist still when you arrived. When we zoom out even further, we can see the entire Milky Way galaxy, inside of which Earth is located right here. This yellow dot is the furthest extent of humanity's radio broadcasts throughout history, which means that any possible aliens who live outside of this range are totally unaware of humanity's presence. It's complete silence outside of this yellow dot as far as we are currently aware, but the entire galaxy spans over 100,000 light years from end to end. There are over 100 billion stars and over 100 billion planets inside of our galaxy. But you have never seen the full glory of the galaxy at night, because 99% of the stars that you can see with the naked eye are limited to this small, tiny region right here. But even this massive galaxy is nothing compared to the rest of what's out there. Zooming out even further and we arrive at the local group of galaxies, a collection of 54 different galaxies that is about 10 million light years across. But zooming out even further and we can see the Virgo supercluster, of which the local group here is just a tiny segment of. There are at least 100 other groups of galaxies just like our own local group inside of here, and the distance from one side to the other is a mind-numbing 110 million light years. But even the massive Virgo supercluster is nothing but a quiet and tiny lobe of the Great Laniakea supercluster, an enormous structure that is home to our galaxy as well as 100,000 other galaxies. The distance from one side to the other is 520 million light years, but from even there we can zoom out all the way to the entire observable universe and see that even the titanic Laniakea supercluster is just a tiny and insignificant part of everything. This is the observable universe, and it contains everything that we know of. It is home to at least 2 trillion different and individual galaxies, which together contain more stars than there are grains of sand on the entire Earth. The distance from Earth to any side of the observable universe is 46.5 billion light years, which means that the entire width is 93 billion light years across. What's perhaps even more interesting, however, is what actually lies beyond the observable universe. Keep in mind that the observable universe is all that we can currently see, and it's entirely possible that the rest of the universe outside of it is vastly larger and more fantastic than we can possibly ever imagine. We simply don't know what else is out there, because the light from these incredibly distant places has not yet had enough time in the universe's history to reach us yet back on Earth. And the light from some places may never reach us at all. Because some parts of space very far away from Earth are expanding away from us faster than the speed of light, that means that the light from these places will never, in an infinite amount of time, reach Earth. meaning that even if humanity is eternal and exists forever, there will still be an unknown number of places in the universe that we will never know about or ever see. So, it is very likely that as unbelievably enormous as it seems, the observable universe is just a tiny slice of what we can currently see of the entire universe. According to the theory of cosmic inflation that was proposed by Dr. Alan Guth, if it is assumed that cosmic inflation began at 10 to the negative 37th of a second after the Big Bang, and with the assumption that the size of the universe before inflation began was equal to its age times the speed of light, then this would seem to suggest that at the present day, the entire universe is 150 sextillion times larger than the observable universe. That number for reference looks like this, with this many zeros. Let this number sink in for just a moment. This would be similar to you thinking that the entire observable universe, everything that you could see, was the size of a light bulb, but then realizing that in reality the entire universe is larger than the former planet of Pluto. Imagine a light bulb in the center of Pluto, but we inside the light bulb were totally unaware that Pluto existed outside of it, and that's a similar situation to this. We are all so unbelievably small, but you shouldn't worry, because all that means is that there is so much left out there for us to discover together.
It's fairly obvious that dying from some long drawn-out disease is a terrible way to die, but it's far from the only one. David Alan Kerwin and a friend were visiting Yellowstone National Park. David's friend had brought a dog to the park with him, a dog that, like most dogs, loved to dive into water and swim, but Yellowstone, filled with pools of water sometimes over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, is not the place for swimming. The dog, named Moosey, got free from the car and ran for a nearby pool of water and jumped in. The dog began yelping from the pain, and David ran for the dog. Against the warnings of other park visitors not to jump in after him, he went in after Moosey anyway. He swam out to get Moosey, but was unable to retrieve him due to the immense burning. David was pulled back out of the pool and was completely blind and had suffered third-degree burns to his entire body. When a park visitor tried to remove one of his shoes, his flesh came off with it. David remarked that what he had done was stupid and asked how bad he was. He was bad enough that he died in the hospital the following morning. Moosey also did not survive. Hiroshi Ouchi was a nuclear worker in Japan who met with something of an occupational hazard. He was exposed to tremendous amounts of radiation, so much so that his skin began to slowly fall off his body. His chromosomes were entirely destroyed by the radiation, and his body was wasting away. He had been exposed to levels of radiation over 2 times higher than required to kill someone. After being treated for a week, Hiroshi begged to die. After 10 days, he could no longer even communicate. It's believed he was being kept alive for purposes of morbid scientific curiosity. He was kept alive for about 3 months, even resuscitated if his heart stopped. His death was absolute torture and one that exposed Japan's nuclear safety myth. The Salem witch trials were a horrendous event. Numerous people were accused of witchcraft back in those days, which was punishable by death. Horrible superstitions ran rampant and spread wrongful death along with it. For Giles Corey, a man by the age of 71 when he was accused of witchcraft, he refused to give in to the legal process and would not plead guilty or innocent to the charges against him. He found them ridiculous. There was a law for that. If a person would not allow for a trial to take place, they would be pressed. That's what Giles Corey faced. Lying naked on a floor, he had a plank of wood set on top of him, and rocks were piled on, slowly crushing him. Time went on, as did more and more rocks. The weight became so much at one point that his tongue popped out of his mouth and had to be forced back in. Each time he was asked to plea, he simply said, "More weight." After 2 days of torture, Giles succumbed to the torture and died. It's believed his final words were, "More weight." Assassins aren't often looked on with favor. Balthazar Gerard was responsible for the shooting assassination of the Dutch revolutionist William the Silent in 1584. Balthazar was brought before magistrates where he showed no remorse for what he had done. Without even an attempt to lie to cover his tracks, he was sentenced to death by torture. Balthazar was tied to a pole and whipped mercilessly. Overnight, his feet and hands would be bound together to make sleep impossible. Day after day, he was tied to the pole. 300-pound weights were hung from his big toes and left there for half an hour. Well-oiled shoes made of dog skin, far too small for his feet, were forced on and held over a fire. The shoes contracted tightly and crushed his feet into useless stumps. The shoes were forcefully removed and tore off his flesh with them. His armpits were branded and burning hot bacon fat was spilled all over his body. Then nails were hammered between the flesh and nails of his hands and feet. Balthazar was said to remain calm during his torture and died days after it all began. Racism can inspire horrendous things. Emmett Till was 14 years old in 1955 and was visiting family in Mississippi. The exact story isn't clear, but it's believed that Emmett had an interaction with 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant, a married woman who was a proprietor of a small grocery store. Some accounts claimed he wolf whistled at her, which was the most likely event. However, Emmett whistled to alleviate his stutter, not to flirt with women. Other accounts claim he was much more forward with his flirting. Either way, Carolyn's husband Roy and his half-brother went to the home Emmett was staying at and took him away out to a barn. They beat him beyond recognition and gouged out one of his eyes before shooting him in the head and dumping his body into a river. Roy and his half-brother were both acquitted of the kidnapping and murder charges, and after they were freed, under the protection of double jeopardy, a defense that prohibits being put on trial for the same crime twice, they sold an interview to Look magazine where they fully confessed to killing Emmett Till. Places designed for entertainment and fun can still be host to terrible dangers. Deborah Gale Stone was an 18-year-old girl in 1974 who worked as a hostess for the Disneyland attraction America Sings, which was a large theater that hosted an outer ring of seats that rotated around a fixed center, which housed a number of different stages. It's not clear how it happened exactly, but while the seating was rotating, Deborah accidentally stepped into a small channel between the rotating wall and a stationary wall. Deborah was caught between the two and began screaming as she was crushed to death in what was considered to be the happiest place on Earth. It's believed a number of people thought the screams were actually a part of the show. The attraction was promptly shut down so safety precautions could finally be installed. Kelly Ann Bates proves that dating an abuser is a very bad idea. She was only 17 years old in 1996 when she was brutally murdered by her much older partner, but it wasn't a quick death. Her partner, James Patterson Smith, tortured her over a period of 4 weeks. Her body, when examined, horrified even seasoned veterans in the field. He had broken bones, burned her numerous times. He stabbed her with knives, forks, and scissors. He stabbed her inside of her mouth, crushed both of her hands, mutilated her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, and genitalia. He wounded her with gardening tools, partially scalped her, and gouged out both of her eyes and stabbed the empty sockets. The examiner claimed that she had had her eyes gouged out around 5 days into the month-long torture. James eventually ended the poor girl's suffering by drowning her in a bathtub. He was sentenced to life in prison. A number of jury members had to receive counseling from being shown the evidence in the case. We know that oil drilling can pose a significant threat to the environment, but also to its workers. Byford Dolphin is a semi-submersible drilling rig. It's had its fair share of unfortunate accidents, one specifically in 1983 that involved explosive decompression. 4 divers were inside a decompression chamber system that was attached to a diving bell. The pressure inside the chambers was at 9 atmospheres. Through a slip-up in procedure, one of the diving tenders outside opened the clamp in the trunk connecting to the diving bell before Diver 4 closed the door in Chamber 1. The divers were all exposed to the effects of explosive decompression, dropping from a pressure of 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second. One of the divers violently exploded, internal organs blowing out in all directions, all limbs tearing off, even his spine was ejected. His remains were found scattered around the rig as far as 30 feet away. 5 people died, including the tender who opened the clamp. The second tender was severely injured, but survived. There's nothing like a good old-fashioned revolution. Gheorghe Doza led a peasants' rebellion against the Kingdom of Hungary as peasants began to experience less and less freedom. Gheorghe's rebellion was eventually squashed, however, and he was captured. Gheorghe was given a throne, but not the type he would have hoped for. It was a throne of iron, heated, burning hot. He was forced to sit down onto it, and he burned. A heated iron crown was placed atop his head, and he was forced to hold a heated scepter in his hand. Over 70,000 peasants were tortured for their part in the rebellion, and 9 were present for Gheorghe's torture. They had been starved before the event and brought out one by one. Hot pliers were taken out and grabbed into parts of Gheorghe's flesh, tearing parts away. The starved peasants were forced to eat from the gaping wounds. Anyone who refused was sliced apart immediately. Gheorghe eventually died of his injuries while on the throne. Sometimes we must be reminded that true evil certainly does exist. Junko Furuta was a 16-year-old Japanese high school student who was in her 3rd year when she was suddenly abducted by 4 teenage boys and taken to a house belonging to one of the kidnappers' parents. The parents were present for some of what came next, but never tried to intervene as they were fearful of their own son. Junko was tortured and raped for over 40 days in the house. While there, she was fed cockroaches to eat and her own urine to drink. She was set on fire multiple times. Foreign objects were inserted into her body and she was beaten violently day after day. Each and every day brought a new form of hell for Junko. She had weights dropped on her stomach while she was tied to the floor. She'd be hung from the ceiling and be used as a punching bag. Her brain eventually shrunk from the level of abuse that was inflicted upon her. Eventually, she was beaten, set on fire, and went into shock and died. Her corpse was found inside a concrete-filled barrel. It's believed she had been raped between 400 to 500 times. All of the boys were sentenced to prison time, but none of them exceeded a 20-year sentence.
You are about to experience a brief simulation of a psychotic episode in a patient with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia can provide powerful experiences, especially for those undiagnosed or not being treated effectively enough. The symptoms you will experience represent a compilation of a range of sensory occurrences, as reported by actual patients. These occurrences include sights, sounds, as well as wind and even scents. If you have any discomfort during the experience, please signal a facilitator.
Worthless.
He's waking up now.
Oh, the phone woke him up. Don't answer. They'll know who you are.
You're a waste of space.
Why are you so stupid?
A waste of our time.
Stupid. So stupid. Worthless. We hate you.
He's gonna pick up the phone.
They'll know if you lie.
Rain! It's
Something
rain.
wrong. Weather.
Now to get pizza.
Poison.
Coming for you. Pizza.
He's hanging up.
Do you hear me?
Don't eat. Out to get you.
Poison.
They know about you.
Cameras were rolling when the armed gunmen entered the convenience store on 14th Street. The suspects were described as medium in stature with a slightly youthful demeanor. Anyone with information about this incident is urged to contact
They know. They know about you.
And in other news, officials have closed the northbound
Time for
lane
meds. Don't do that.
due to a water main break. Repair crews are on the scene. Now here's a story out of Chicago from last night. Two men posing as maintenance workers nearly made it out of the Quick Bite convenience store with the store's ATM machine.
Make a list. Make a longer list.
Entered the store, asked for
You are ungrateful.
You're a waste of space. A waste of our
They were
time.
going to take the machine back to their
Getting
shop for
coffee
repair.
now.
Don't drink it.
Sensing
Stupid.
something
So
suspicious, the clerk
stupid.
That smells
called
awful.
authorities.
Don't drink that coffee.
When the clerk told the men he had called police, the pair took off and left the machine.
Why are you so worthless?
So Sky, tell us how this weekend's weather is
Weather.
shaping out.
Something wrong.
You know what, Chuck? There's just no stopping the weekend weather. You hear that, worthless? Weather's coming to get you.
Something wrong. Weather.
And what are you going to do about it, huh?
Something wrong. You have to stop it.
You're just going to sit around with your stupid mouth open and do nothing?
You have to stop it. It's the weather. It's here for us.
Now he has to answer the door.
It's here for us. Do something. Stay in.
Pizza.
Stay away from the door.
Stop the weather. Protect us.
Pizza.
You didn't order anything. No. Don't answer. You're stupid to open that door. He has to open the door now.
Here you go.
Don't do it.
You'll be in trouble. Poison.
This is for you.
This is for you.
He's working with them. He's part of the plot.
This is for you.
Shut the door. Shut it.
Don't eat it. Poison.
You're stupid to open it.
I hate you. We
Here are
hate
some
you.
items on today's activities calendar. And you need some activities, especially when you're lazy and you sleep too much. Stop staring at me. I know what you're thinking.
He knows.
You can stop
They're
it.
coming for you. You know that.
Part of the plot.
Use your mind.
It's because you're so ungrateful.
Don't eat it. Poison.
No. Don't open
He
it.
has to open the
This
box.
is entirely your fault.
Don't eat it.
Don't eat it. Poison. Poison.
They're here, and it's all your fault.
Oh.
No.
They know it's you.
You're in
Don't
control.
open the
You
door.
hear that?
No. Don't open it.
Don't open it.
They're here, and it's all your fault.
You did it.
You should have used your mind to stop it.
Stop it. You have to take control.
Stop the door.
Hey, you all right in here? I called you. Why didn't you answer? I was like screaming, "It's Lorraine! It's Lorraine!" into the phone at the top of my lungs.
What were you watching? Do you even remember?
Did the pizza Oh! What happened here? Did you forget to take your medicine this morning? Well, you know it's not good to miss a dose. Well, it's not too late to take it now. Let's get back on track. And why are you standing here in the dark? It's a beautiful day outside. Let some sunlight in. You need to get outside and enjoy it.
This experience is intended to heighten your awareness of the conditions affecting breakthrough symptoms in patients with schizophrenia, who may be in need of efficacious treatments. It is not meant to suggest that all of the symptoms depicted here are displayed by all schizophrenics. There is no typical case of schizophrenia.
Escapism. The tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. For example, like taking the time of your day and enjoying the scenery of Mount Fuji, the largest mountain in Japan, one of the 3 holy mountains that is recognized as a symbol of Japan, a scenic display of majestic beauty, an inspiration for artists and poets, one of Mother Nature's most proudest accomplishments that would attract adventurers and sightseers throughout the world. But for one girl, Yui, Mount Fuji was a rare moment of peace and tranquility, where every day after school, Yui would find herself a nice spot to sit down on, usually near a tree at the local park, and spend all day just sitting there, staring at the mountain. The sight of it had given Yui a blissful experience of freshness. Sometimes, when she could even feel the cool breeze rub against her skin, it was a feeling of freshness and being new. And even though many of us would see this as a free luxury, for Yui, this was something more. It was hope, a taste of freedom, and sensation of enlightenment. Mount Fuji is the most valuable thing that Yui has right now. It's utterly the perfect example of escapism. Because pretty soon, we are going to find out why Yui has an overwhelming dread of going home when she finds herself embracing these blissful moments. So while we enjoy these few seconds of serenity, I'm going to share something. My friends, I'm not here to bless you with a horror story. I'm not looking to scare you. Today's show, I'm here to make you feel very uncomfortable. I'm going to share you a story that's going to disgust you. To have that wonderful experience of human filthiness. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Dharma Barbecue Restaurant. A small restaurant that has a struggling reputation for its unsanitary presence, and appraised for its magnificent meat. The kind of restaurant for those who are daring enough to try new foods, and even barbecue lovers who can tolerate the dirty surroundings. It's the second floor of this restaurant where Yui resides in, and much like the restaurant's gloomy presence, the interior of this home was no different. The place was a byproduct of grimy filth, Because of the terrible ventilation, the greasy air would find itself seeping onto the second floor and coating the walls with its layer of yellowish grease. Actually, everything within the home was coated with grease, from the walls to the ceiling, all the way down to the furniture itself. Since Yui's mother had left, there was never any cleaning that was done. The futons, the blankets, even the clothing would be stained and sticky. Even if they were sent to the laundry down the street, it wouldn't matter, seeing how it wasn't more than a single hour before they got stained again. Meet the father of this world of gloom, and owner of the controversial Dharma Barbecue. A man who has long neglected his hygienic appearance and even came to accept his oily presence that reeked of stale barbecue and foul body odor. Pretty much you can think of him as nothing more but a miserable human being whose life has been confined to a restaurant that's doomed for failure. For our next member of this struggling family is little Goro, a vile and malicious child who not only has a twisted form of entertainment by abusing and tormenting his younger sister, but has this strange fixation with drinking salad oil. Most of the time when nobody's looking, you can find him crouching underneath the kitchen sink, gulping the stuff like it was soda. Then there's Yui, the poor girl who's now grown into having a sensitivity for her greasy shelter. Living like this since her mother left, Yui had finally come to hate it. How she hated her greased-up bully of a brother and her depressing father, who had spent his days and nights tending to a failing restaurant. Saturation levels at 50%. A mental recognition of the density within the air. A small talent that dwells within Yui's thoughts, where she can detect the amount of oil that lingers within the air. And catching her brother trying to finish off another bottle of salad oil, she could feel the saturation levels slowly approaching 60%. Puberty. The moment when adolescents reach that certain age of maturity. But for Goro, it was an age where his life was now stepping into a teenage nightmare when he had finally gotten his collection of beauty marks, where his curious experimentation upon these facial marks would be greeted by a sensitive and yet sharp, stinging pain, as he would relieve himself from the small stream of thick pus. It wasn't long before his entire face would be covered. Life at school had become a miserable hell for Goro, having all the pretty girls laughing at him in his hideous face, constantly hounded by the words freak or pimple face, fucking crater face, even becoming a constant target for relentless bullies. Life for Goro was like becoming an example of why God would have a sick sense of humor, where his misery had become the morbid entertainment for other people. And even with his sister witnessing the torment from a distance, not knowing how to share her support, had infected Goro with the delusional idea that his own sister was enjoying the torment. That she too had thought of him as a freak, something to laugh at. Because of that misunderstanding, which was more like a delusional excuse, later that day, Yui had found herself being viciously attacked by her brother. After everything Goro had done to her, the teasing, the abuse, pulling the hair, it must have felt good for Yui when seeing Goro getting his share of torment. According to Goro, that's what Yui must have had on her mind when she watched her brother being beaten and stepped on by the other kids in school. But with Goro's smelly father trying to stop his son from assaulting Yui, the meddling fool, who never knew nor cared that this was all his fault. His own son, who's now a freak, contaminated by his filthy fucking grease, all because of a dying restaurant. Goro's father was a failure who lingered on a dream that sent his life into the shitter, an old man who didn't know how to run a restaurant, who couldn't manage enough money to even fix the ventilation, who couldn't even keep a steady marriage because of the hopeless expectations that he has for this sorry excuse of a restaurant. Goro's father knew that this was all his fault, and yet the failure was too coward to man up to the greasy pit that they live in. When the fight between Goro and his father had finally ended, all that remained was the remnants of a man who had once dreamed of running a successful business, owner of a highly successful restaurant, while growing a happy family. What Yui was now looking at was a foolish old man who had just now woken up and realized what kind of world he was in. That his dreams of success had become an unbearable nightmare, a shell of a man who had the inner desire, the urgency to shed a tear of shame. But wiping the greasy sweat from his face, before his skin would be instantly coated with the greasy sweat, slowly dripping from his face to the tip of his nose. That was when Yui's father had come to understand the inevitable future. After that dreadful day, Goro had stopped going to school and had pretty much overtaken the entire house because of how his father had come to fear his son and his violent behavior. Now with his father lacking the fortitude, the enthusiasm to bring an end to Goro's unwanting behavior, his strange addiction with drinking salad and cooking oil had dramatically increased. It was every day where Goro would be holed up in his room, chugging bottles and even buckets of oil, not only gaining weight with his repulsive diet, but his entire face was now covered with abnormal pustules. Goro was an unbearable sight to look at. If you had the stomach to even look at him longer than 30 seconds, you could even see some of the white pus trying to emerge from the small swelling boils that had decorated his face. For Yui, life had become more miserable as the abuse and torment increased, forced into living under her brother's unhealthy and malicious lifestyle, reluctantly following every demand by fetching more salad oil, blankets, and futons, while taking every blatant insult that's thrown her way. And just as Yui had thought that things could not get any worse, it was on one day, during one of Goro's violent tantrums, watching him clench his hideous face within a fit of rage, where Yui would be disgusted by the small streams of pus that were injected from her brother's face. And when Goro had watched Yui's disgust with the small splashes of foreign pus that had struck her on the arm and face, had given Goro a hesitant pause of disbelief, slowly convincing himself that his own sister had found his greasy body gross. A delusional thought that would be relieved with the dreadful idea, why not teach his sister how gross he can truly be? Why not give her a taste? Forcing Yui into the ground, giving her a front row seat of Goro's idea of a horror show. It was when Yui would see Goro's face being swallowed by a swarm of small boils between his two hands that were clasping his entire face. And that was when it happened, where Crater Face had finally erupted and showered the helpless Yui with the small streams of greasy pus. The sight that had frozen Yui with utter disgust and horror as she would feel the thick fluids of warming grease covering her face before she would feel Goro's hands around her throat, denying her the ability to even breathe in the filthy air. Humiliated and petrified as Yui had tried grasping for air, overhearing Goro's murderous rants of wanting to be remembered as the most foulest villain, wanting to burn in the deepest pits of hell, burnt into a black, greasy smoke that everybody in hell can have something to choke on. Everybody has to die, and what better way to kick it off than snuffing out Yui? It was instant and unexpected, where Goro's murderous intent was interrupted by his useless father, striking his son across the head with a metal frying pan, standing over Goro's lifeless body, becoming a scene where his failing and hopeless life would evolve into something unthinkable. May God forgive this hopeless father for killing his malicious son, and for what he's about to do. The following week, the Dharma barbecue had mysteriously exhausted itself of its popular trademark meat and replaced with a new and strange meat, proudly served to every guest who would dare enter the doors of this filthy, greasy restaurant. Saturation levels now reaching 70%. The air was becoming more dense. The levels of heat had begun to rise, and that was when the strange dreams had begun infecting Yui's mind. It would begin with Yui's moment of escapism, standing before the beautiful sight of Mount Fuji. Except this time, Yui's body was not greeted by the cool air, no feelings of freshness or bliss. Instead was the overwhelming sensation of uncomfortable heat, the stench of foulness that had lingered within the air, and like an oversized pustule that had infected the earth itself, Mount Fuji, a scenery of beauty, had suddenly given a volcanic eruption, as the skies would be filled with its revolting sludge and engulfing the town below within a wave of grease, giving her the experience of drowning within a sea of grease as she would be swept away by the wave. When the wave had settled, literally every street, every building, car, tree, and living creature within the town would be covered with a thickened layer of yellowish grease. A revolting sight that had not only caused her to lose her appetite, but had given her a painful sickness when she would be awakened from this dream. Even though it had become difficult for Yui to find any sleep because of the heat and the grease, every time she would always have these nightmares, vivid and realistic. It's because of them nightmares, Yui had never felt the same feelings of peace and freshness when she would look at Mount Fuji. Saturation levels at 80%. It said that the face was supposed to be the most dirtiest part of the human body. Anyways, it was sometime after her father's business was hanging on a thread. It didn't take long before Yui had found herself being infected with her own set of abnormal beauty marks. Before she even knew it, her entire face would be covered. Much like her brother, Yui had also become a shameful freak that would isolate herself from the outside world, confined within her own greasy prison. She had also found herself sharing the same feelings of anger towards her useless father, blaming the old fool for this miserable suffering. It was during one of Yui's nightmares, when she had found herself stepping further into the filthy torment that dwelled within the pit of her mind, when going through the experience of drowning when being engulfed by a wave of grease, an awful experience that would have her waking up to her father, forcing her into drinking a bottle of cooking oil. Till this day, Yui will never forget the expression he had, a desperate tendency, that behind this image of urgency was something sinister that was pleading for Yui to drink the oil. A man who was obsessed with a delusional sickness before Yui would bring her father back into reality after smacking the bottle of oil from her father's hand. Waking up to a bottle of salad oil being shoved down your throat definitely makes you wonder what the hell is going on with Yui's father. Until you start connecting the dots between little Goro, and his father's horrible way of keeping the restaurant supplied with meat. Obviously, Yui's father had played dumb, a spineless fool who had kept his devious intent behind the excuse of wanting to help Yui with their troubles. That this misunderstanding of assuming that she had a craving for salad oil was no big deal. A loving father who had thought that his sickened and saddened daughter was hungry. This whole time, the nightmares, the feelings of nausea, loss of appetite, the painful sickness, the stinging boils on her face. How long has her father been doing this? Trying to make her into like Goro. Since that night, Yui had never slept. Instead, she would force herself awake throughout the long nights, watching her father trying to sneak into her room every hour or two. It was only a couple days later before the restaurant had stopped seeing any customers. With the supply of meat running out, her father swimming in debt, and the restaurant being hounded with complaints because of how customers were hospitalized after Yui's father began serving customers with this new and strange meat. Eventually, the man had given up on involving Yui within this horrible scheme and began drinking the salad oil himself. Saturation levels have now reached above 90%. The Dharma Barbecue had finally closed its doors, and yet the saturation levels had never dropped. In fact, it had dramatically increased. As a result, Yui's father had now become nothing but a pathetic man who had lived his days in depression. His life was now at rock bottom. His body temperature had risen. The aged body odor that had been lingering around him had begun filling and staining the house. Even the saturation levels had increased because of his body heat. The man was now dripping with a constant flow of greasy sweat. The house was like living in a steam bath. Breathing the foul air had become difficult. The heat was relentless. The odor had even grown so vile that it had given Yui a feeling of her insides being soured and rotted, sometimes sending a sharp pain through her chest. Saturation levels now at 93%. The walls were not only caked with a thick layer of grease, giving a constant flow of dripping fluids because of the heat. Even the grease that was coming from the ceiling had made it look like it was raining within the house. It was like a slow rain that had lingered over Yui. Saturation levels now at 95%. Because of how the air was so dense, it had even contaminated the water, instantly giving a thick film of grease before turning into sludge. You could not even drink a glass of water without having it being filled with grease. Saturation levels now at 97%. The futon, the furniture, every clothing were now ruined, drenched from all the grease that was absorbed. Saturation levels now at 98%. So right now, I bet you're asking yourself, why doesn't Yui just leave this nightmarish hell? Why continue on putting herself through this torment? And to be honest, I really don't know. There are just some people in this world who choose to do things that make absolutely no sense. And of course, I know better than to question something that may have its own set of reasons, personal reasons. But the one question that I'm more interested in is, what did it take for Yui to finally leave this greasy hell? It was on one night when overhearing the familiar sounds of her father chopping. A very strange sound to be filling the greasy house, seeing how the restaurant was closed and that there was no more meat. A very curious sound that had Yui descending to the lower part of the building, step into the restaurant, reluctantly peer into the back kitchen, and come upon the scene that had finally convinced her to leave the house. Standing before Yui was her father, performing his last attempt on saving the restaurant by chopping on a foot, cutting it into finer pieces. It was his own foot. Till this very day, Yui had never forgotten the brownish sludge that was slowly coming from her father's missing leg. My God. Well, I bet we're hungry for some tasty barbecue right now. Thinking about enjoying a nice, greasy meal during a hot summer day. Anyways, my friends, I thank you dearly for helping me reach my quota with my last video. And I hope you enjoyed today's show, or found it traumatizing and uncomfortable. For those who like to share a little love and help me with what I do on here, you can visit me on my Patreon with the link below. If you want to be friends, you have a desperate question for me, or a curiosity, or you just want to stalk me, you can visit me on my Twitter, also with the link below. Until next time, my friends, thank you for watching the show.
John Burns, son of John Senior Mel, brother Captain Chris, at the front of the December 21st, 1988, Barry Valentino, son of Barry Senior Jean, brother Scott, Mark and Lisa Ann's friend, my friend. February 1985, Frank Oppenheimer, brother Robert, husband of Jackie Emily, father Michael, our friend. In 1987, Henrietta Graham, mother of Ian Ingwell, Sally, my friend. March 17, 1988, Edward McGellis, brother of William, Jim, May, and Peggy, father of Shirley, Abby, and Josephine. April 1988, Ruth Arnani, wife of Papa, friend of Bob and me. October 1988, Morgan Shoemake, father of Barbara, husband of Elsie, Barbara's dad. August 22nd, 1985, Irene McGellis Tutulio. Sister Millie Margaret D'Antoni, Ida Dominic Marscat, Elvira and Joe. Wife of William, mother Mary Ann, grandmother Liz and Billy. Me. July 4th, 1987, Peter Gunlock, son of Robert Step of Kay, brother Bob, Karen, Cindy, and Mary, husband of Liz, the father, Shady Mocha, Rick, and Lucy. My brother-in-law. November 1988, John Burns, son of John Sr. and Marilyn, brother of Kathy and Chris, step of friend of Lisa and Billy. December 21st, 1988, Barry Valentino, son of Barry Sr. and Jean, brother Scott, Mark, and Lisa, Ann's friend. February 1985, Frank Oppenheimer, brother of Robert, husband of Jackie and Millie, father of Michael. May 1987, Henrietta Graham, mother of Ian Ingwell, Sally. March 17, 1988, Edward McGellis, brother of William, Jim, and Peggy, father of Shirley, Abby, and Geraldine. August 1988, Ruth Manani, wife of Uncle, friend of Bob. October 1988, Megan Shaye, brother of Robert, husband of Elsie, kidney failure.
You're tuned to WKCR-FM New York, 89.9 on your dial. Colombian music is running a little late. It will be starting in a few minutes.